All right, if you're just joining us, breaking news in the Kim Potter trial. Potter officially found guilty on 2 counts of manslaughter. For more analysis on this, we want to bring in our panel, distinguished professor at Touro College, Thane Rosenbaum. We also have attorney and GOP strategist Amir Benno and former chief economist for the U.S. International Trade Commission, Peter Morici. Thank you to the three of you for being with us. I was getting Thane's reaction before we had to cut to a break. I actually want to pick up with Amir Benno on your reaction to this.
Well, I'm stunned. I will tell you that I really, like Thane, did not think that this was going to be the result. Frankly, I thought that this was a very strong case for the defense, a very weak prosecution case, not least of which because the prosecution had to show that what Kimberly Potter did was unreasonable, which is judged by an objective standard. So it doesn't matter what was going through her head, it's whether the facts that were confronting her would have warranted the use of deadly force. And the facts were not disputed. And I think on those facts, there have been several similar cases over the years that have made their way up to the Supreme Court, where the court has said that either it's reasonable to use deadly force in such circumstances, or at least it's very questionable. And if it's questionable, that means that the prosecution couldn't sustain their burden beyond a reasonable doubt. So there's no way to really know what was going through the minds of the jury during deliberations, but this is definitely headed for an appeal.
Peter, share with us your thoughts about this and where you think the defense wasn't able to prove in this case, that Potter had mistakenly had made a, quote, mistake in shooting off that firearm.
Well, I think that we can't say that her behavior was unjustifiable or that it was, out of line with the law, especially when you consider how quick these decisions are going to be made. You just have to wonder how much the atmospherics in Minneapolis around George Floyd and the rioting that took place in many cities in 2020 affected their thinking and concerns and so forth. And if police are going to be convicted in circumstances like these, who is going to want to be a policeman or a woman? Who's going to be willing to serve and stand between us and some of the really nasty people in the world and do some very, thankless work if a career and now a life can be upended and destroyed this way? We have to accept that in some measure, police use violence, state-sanctioned violence. They have weapons. And in some circumstances, these things, are going to be outcomes. And that if we expect them to stand out there and have them second-guessed in this manner, then I don't know how anyone is safer today than we were yesterday because of this. I have to believe we are less safe.
Thane, we were obviously opening this conversation by talking about sort of the climate in Minneapolis. Minneapolis is a U.S. city that is riddled with high crime. Obviously, as we've mentioned in this panel here, this incident took place during the Derek Chauvin trial, the officer charged with George Floyd's murder. Talk to me about sort of the differences in this case of what made it, what may have factored into the jury's decision here.
Well, it's similar to the point I made earlier. Resisting arrest has always been sympathetic in the minds of jurors if a police officer is in a high crime neighborhood and the suspect is resisting arrest. And in this instance, there was a question of whether he may have had a weapon. There was a question that he may be driving away and dragging along another police officer on the road. The chaos of the situation, the speed with which this was all happening, very different than the George Floyd case, right? The whole George Floyd case was naturally slowed down because we had a knee on a neck that went on for a very long time with everyone yelling at the police officer. Here, everything was instantaneous, happening in real time under situations of chaos, made it very different. What I would have thought was different is because this trial took place after George Floyd, I would have thought that the politics around the racial problems that we're having in our nation would have subsided somewhat here. But I don't think so. I agree with my friends, other panelists, that I think the politics outside the courtroom. Look, there's a fiction in our legal system, which is the jury only evaluates what's presented for them at trial. And that's how they're instructed. Nothing other outside the courtroom can interfere with your decision making. But that's a fiction, right? We all live in the world. The judge can tell you whatever he. Yeah, I just think that
I've served on criminal juries, and I've lived in the city of Minneapolis. And my son is a graduate of the University of Minnesota, which is right smack in the middle of Minneapolis. And I think that the very progressive mentality of Minneapolis, coupled with the events of 2020, has created a cauldron of emotion that is very deleterious to the police and their ability to do their job. And in the end, 10, 20 years from now, Minneapolis is going to mourn this verdict. That's my prediction, that this is going to prove to be a salient point, a grave mistake, and it's going to be one that Minneapolis will pay for in the form of a police force that is essentially, disempowered, unable to recruit, and very, very difficult to reconstruct. They don't have to defund
All right,
the
gentlemen,
police. They just neutered it.
Yeah, Peter, thanks for that. Gentlemen with the panel, we'll be right back.